Oh, right. Yeah, this come up on my YouTube, and I thought because we did George Galloway, we did George Galloway. I think it was the Iraq War. I don't think he was debating. I can't. I think he might have been debating someone actually, and he just butchered them. But then I saw this come up: Andrew Tate and George Galloway clash. I thought this can be interesting because everyone knows Andrew Tate, and everyone knows he says controversial things for the sake of it. Do you know what I mean? Like to get clicks and whatever. But he's actually very smart too. Like he's not an idiot, and I think that's been his secret weapon almost. Is that people think he's a loudmouth idiot, but he's actually not. He's actually smart, and even his saying controversial things really is smart because he understands the way the people's minds work and that they want controversy and they want an argument and they want, yeah. So he's very smart, and I think people get him on their shows to debate, and they think they're just gonna steamroll him. And like I say, he's not an idiot. Um, so I thought this would be interesting because yeah, I've seen George Galloway go at someone, and it's a thing to behold. So this should be an interesting matchup. So yeah, Andrew Tate versus George Galloway. Let's go.
Let me clarify. Are you a Muslim?
Yes.
Well, that makes some of the things you seemed to be saying very difficult for former supporters of yours and former supporters of mine, because you seemed to be buying into the reckless synonym of Muslim with groomer, when in fact you and I both know that the vast majority, I was raped by a white colonel in the Army Cadet Force in 1963
Yep.
or 64.
Yep.
Couldn't get less of a Muslim.
Yep.
These kind of things are carried out by all kinds of people.
Absolutely.
Evil people.
Absolutely.
From all walks of life.
Absolutely. But the problem is, if our government is seen to be showing favor for one group, if our government is seen to be showing favor for one group when they commit a crime and not others, this is where the problems are going to break down in society. This is how multiculturalism collapses. As a Muslim, it's extremely important for me that I stand up and say that as Muslims, we do not need special treatment under the law. We do not need special favor under the law. We do not need protection under the law. No. If we have a scenario in which grooming gangs of white people or grooming gangs of Irish people, Turkmenistani people, Taiwanese people, it doesn't matter, are facing the full force of the law, and it seems that so far, there is some degree of bias towards Muslims committing this crime for whatever reason. This is where you're going to have far-right extremism. This is where you're going to have racism. You're handing gunpowder to the enemies of multiculturalism. You're handing them bullets that they can use. And I'm saying that if you want to have a multicultural society, it's extremely important that everybody is treated fairly under the law. That's probably the first and most important premise. You know very well, if you look at Africa and all these countries, the first thing that ends up in these massive genocides and civil wars is one group feeling like they're not treated fairly under the law. So it's disgusting.
The Labour Party covered up.
Yeah. Well, both sides I can actually fully get. Like I always say, I don't know why the Catholic Church... I mean, the Catholic Church is bad and it's rampant within it, but it's also rampant within most societies within society. Like, if you know what I mean? Like you said, military, private schools. Yeah, like it goes so deeper than just Catholics. But I also get what Andrew Tate said. And English people, and well, not just, yeah, English people really, but that's English people whether you're Indian, black, white. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter. If you've born in England, people do see that, like, that there is but they're not really, because like I say, it's rampant within the British hierarchy in the upper classes and no one wants to draw light on that either. Like but without a doubt, the the Islamic or the Muslim group, and Andrew Tate's right. It takes good, and that's what people have a problem with Islam more than anything, is that good Muslims don't stand up and call out bad Muslims. It's a bit like, I think, what the problem with the left at the minute. Good left wing people aren't calling out the nonsense that's coming from the left. Like, yeah, let's just carry on with them two.
Examples of grooming
Yep.
in my own town of Rochdale, for example, they did it for electoral reasons.
And this is my point. So Muslims should stand up and say, we don't need this, we don't want this, we don't advocate for this. This is extremely important if you want to be accepted. I'm not, a lot of Muslims have been mad at me for this point of view. But I've sat there and said, when this happens, if Islamic men commit these heinous crimes and the government covers up for them, and then the far right gets angry, and then instead of Muslims standing up saying this is wrong, they say, oh, you just hate Muslims, you're advocating for and you're perpetuating the problem. I think the only way you make the problem go away is you go up to everybody of any political ideology, of every race, it doesn't matter what it is, and say this is wrong and these people do not deserve protection under the law.
Well, it's worse if a sex abuser is a Muslim, because he's pretending to be a believer in God and a follower of the Prophet, just as it's worse if a Catholic priest is a sexual abuser. It's not something to be covered up, it's something to be more energetically...
Not to the child. Not to the child that's getting abused. It's irrelevant what religion they follow. But it's right. It isn't something that's more relevant in the Islamic community than it is in any other community. It's rampant in every community. But yeah, what Andrew Tate's saying is right. You got to stand up and call it out. And I'll tell you at the end anyway, something I experienced, which is crazy. But yeah, that's right.
In an Islamic country, they face the death penalty in most of them. So this is not the fact that Islam supports these things, but this perpetuation and this conflation comes from the fact that the government covers it up, and then when it's finally exposed, not enough Muslims stand up on side of the far right saying, look, I don't care what religion they are, I don't care what race they are, you cannot cover up crimes subjectively for one group of people and not the others. Instead, Muslims stand up and try and say Islamophobia or whatever, and this causes the divide that the far right want. This is the divide that everybody's been looking for all of this time. You can't give your enemy bullets and then be complaining when they shoot them. So if we want to live in a multicultural society, I think it's extremely important that all Muslims stand up and say what happened was heinous, what happened was wrong, what happened shouldn't ever happen again, and under the law, we do not require or expect special protection. If you're going to start saying to the British government, we want to be treated differently than the native British people, well, now you're going to have a big problem. Maybe not today, but sooner or later. So I think we should all be treated fairly. I don't think there's anything wrong with requesting that or asking for that.
No, of course. Now, look, let's move.
Yeah, I think Andrew Tate's right, but the whole child abuse thing is a very big topic, especially in this country, and it's a topic that needs to be had. Because if you watch the stings, you get these different groups that do stings, where they set up a pedo, and it goes across any age, any race. There's like no specific race. I mean, obviously, if you're doing it in England, you're going to get more white people because there are more white people. But if you watch them stings, it goes across every social, racial dynamics. Do you know what I mean? It's yeah. But then on the other side of that is that the sentencing for them is ridiculous. That you can essay a child and get 3 years in prison for it when you're found guilty, but someone selling drugs gets 15. How does that in any way make sense? But yeah, the thing I experienced, which is crazy, and I'll tell you what it was first. I did a course for it's like a 1 week was a leadership course, and 1 week was this, and 1 week was and 1 week it was like a 4 week course, I think, and like one of the weeks was safeguarding issues, um, and one of them was female genital mutilation. That's something that should be brought up and safeguarded because it's so common in Britain in 2024. Female genital mutilation. Now, where's that come from? That hasn't come from the Africans. Africans have been coming for years, and that wasn't an issue here. Sikhs, not coming from the Sikhs, it's Islam. Right? That is something. Female genital mutilation is so big that it has to be included within courses of safeguarding in Britain in 2025. And because, like, I think personally that, like, what Andrew Tate's saying is right, that the good Muslims need to call out. And I don't think all Muslims is bad. I know Muslims. You know what I mean? I live in London. I know you grow up around everyone if you live in London. Like, I'm sure there's parts of this country where it is mainly white people, but not really here. Do you know what I mean? We grew up with every religion and every race. It was like just common. So I know good Muslims, I know bad Muslims, but that goes true with every group of people. But he's right. The problem is not that there's bad Muslims or good Muslims, and that like it's that people don't feel like Muslims are getting the same, like, because ultimately because our country doesn't want to be called racist, and I think our history has a lot to play with that. We have such a bad history of conquering the world and doing awful things to people that now we seem to be too afraid to implement our values that are good because we don't want to be seen as colonizers and racists. But it's like, well, to be fair, historically, we all are colonizers. You got to get over that. You got to get over that. And, like, for example, a person who does bad things doesn't mean that they've got a bad moral or they're a bad person and that everything they think is bad and evil. Not at all, not in a long shot. Do you know what I mean? People, like, you'll have gangsters that would hurt someone, kill someone, but would never touch a child, never touch a woman, and would defend them in any situation they had to. So it doesn't make someone bad because they do bad things. And I think that Britain as a country, there's some good values to this country, but I think they're just too scared to be called racist. And I do think it comes from our past that we feel like we have to kind of bow. But it never worked with anybody else. In the 70s and the 60s and 70s, when Indians and Africans um, came to this country in like a mass, um, a mass migration, they was told that they had to kind of have the values. They was told to have the values of the country. He was brought up like that. But by the time the Muslim population come to Britain, I think Britain was so wounded by its own past that they didn't want to do that, and that it become kind of a hands-off subject, that's their culture and that's what they do, when it actually is not. There's a lot of Muslims that don't, but like Andrew Tate said, you got to stand up and call it out. Like, you got to call out the child abuse, you got to call out, like, but then what, again, like what George Galloway said is true too. More importantly than that, we need to call it out within our own British hierarchy. Like, if you watch the ex-gangsters, and I'm talking the most dangerous people Britain ever produced. Most of them was child abuse victims, whether sexually or beaten at reform schools or what do they call them? They're not boarding schools. It begins detention centres, the short, sharp shock. But you see so many people from this country, like old criminals, that would have never been criminals if they didn't end up in the care system and got abused in one way or another. Whether, yeah, like a lot of them, it's sexual abuse, and um, yeah, the rest would have been beaten. And then them same kids that went through that and got brutalized and made into criminals were then condemned by that society as being criminals. And when you made them, literally so many people's stories start from the child in this country, start from the child homes and abuse. I'll give you a perfect example. Yummy B. You can look up Yummy B. You know, Yummy B was a little quiet squirt, basically. Got sexually abused at his care home. He went on holiday with his mum and dad, and on the way back, his dad had a heart attack, bang, or a stroke, killed him outright. Next thing, his mum's lost her mind, become a drug addict, couldn't look after the kids, so the kids went in care. Happened rapid like that, and all of a sudden, him and his sisters, and before you know it, the headmaster of the care home was sexually abusing Yami. And it went on and on and on. Yami ran away, told someone, didn't matter, because in this country, them kids is used as, they're put down as mentally ill so that they don't get listened to. And Yami went through that abuse, told someone, didn't get the help, which is arguably more damaging than the actual abuse itself, is that when you actually reached out to someone, they didn't help you. And you ended up back in that situation getting abused. And it went on until one day the guy embarrassed him by throwing him outside the care home, all the kids laughing. So he got up, stabbed him with his compass out of his school bag, stabbed him up with the compass, and got put in prison, got beaten up in prison, and then basically decided, I'm not having this no more, and I'm going to kill anybody that even looks at me the wrong way. He ended up serving 38 years in prison because of something that, and he would have never gone that way without the abuse. So yeah, to say that the grooming and that is something that's exclusive to Islam is not true. But what Andrew Tate is doing is right. If he's a Muslim, he should be able to call out the Muslim, and not say it's Islamophobic to highlight that, but say like society needs to call this out. But yeah, like the Catholic Church seems to be the poster boy for that. That seems to be the allowed one to throw it at, is the Catholic Church. That people can say that, people can make jokes about that, but you can't say it. Like I say, the British higher ups, it goes so deep, and I'd recommend you look at John Wedger as an ex-policeman who just every department of the police he got put on in Britain. He's like, once you start talking to these criminals, it's like most of their stories all link back to the same place, child homes. Yeah, yeah, it's a big problem. It's a big problem. But yeah, I would say personally, like, but that's the other thing, is that you want to call it out, but then the media, yeah, the media doesn't want to call out certain things. But then I've also seen journalists say with this is why I think I'm pretty fair with everything. I kind of look at everybody's side, and you can say that, is the media covering up the Muslim grooming gangs? But then is the media covering up the BBC and the high up politicians of this country that do the same thing? But I saw a journalist say you can write a story about that, but the editor of the paper is not going to put it in because a newspaper is meant. If you're putting a story in a newspaper, it's being read while you're sat at the table of a morning having a cup of tea with your kids sat there having breakfast, and he's like, and people don't want to read in their paper about child abuse. People don't want to deal with it. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to. It ruins their day. And he's like, that's why them stories don't get run. It's not necessarily that it's a big cover up. It's just that if you put that in your paper every day, your paper's not going to sell. People won't buy it. So then that gave me an actual thing for journalists where I thought I can kind of, maybe it's not necessarily that it's a cover up. It's just that they know that people don't want to read that. But then on the other side of that, you should have the journalistic integrity to say whether you want to read it or not, it needs to be known. But yeah, like I say, I think as another we're going back to Islam, and to I like when people say multiculturalism doesn't work. I don't think that's true. I think more languages have been spoken in England in any other place in Europe for like 1,000 years or so, for like hundreds of years. So it has worked. But I think where it doesn't work is when you come from a culture that just shares different values. If your values don't, like, you can have multiculturalism as long as you're like the Sikhs. The Sikhs flourish in this country, the Chinese flourish in this country, but Islam, it doesn't. And I think there's multiple reasons for that. Like I say, I think a big reason was that they wasn't made to what's it called, assimilate into the culture, into the British culture, which you should. Like if I went to move, let's say if I moved, which I'm kind of thinking I would like to, is move to Canada. But if I moved to Canada, you'd have to take on the Canadian vibe because you're in their country. Do you know what I mean? Is you can't go over there and expect that you're gonna. I don't. Or let's say if I went to America, I'll just start driving on the other side of the road because well, I'm British. I always drive on that. Do you know what I mean? I mean that's a not a value based thing. It's a law based thing. But that, yeah, it's a analogy for that type of thing. It's like it doesn't work. You're gonna end up crashing, basically. Yeah. But yeah, and I think our other cultures was kind of made to assimilate to the British culture, which you can argue may be a bad thing. I wouldn't argue that you're making people come and change their identity, but in a way, if you want the society to carry on ticking and working together, there has to be a kind of alignment of values that you feel the same about things, which ultimately is how humans work, anyways. How you work in your friend group. Most people's friends are kind of similar to what they like and do, and do you know what I mean? So yeah, but if you look at like the Africans, they didn't have a choice but to assimilate. They was told to. But then another side of that is that we conquered Africa and we conquered India. Well, parts of it. And I remember having people, two African mates. One was from Kenya and the other one was from I can't remember. But one spoke London ghetto, but perfect. Like sounded like he'd grown up in London with that ghetto London slang. And the other one spoke posh. But they were both born and bred in Africa, brought up there, and I think one come over when they was 14 and the other one come over when they were like 15, whatever, yeah, whatever. But they spoke English like without an accent. Now you get Africans that I guess older, where they still have that accent. They speak English but with an accent. But and I remember I said to him, "How comes you speak good English?" Which kind of does seem a bit offensive to say to someone, but I generally meant it because I'm thinking, especially the one that spoke posh, he spoke better English than most English people do. I was like, what? Like how? And especially as well, if you come over here quite late, if you come over here in your teens, like why have you not got an accent? And they said, because where they were born, you learn British, you learn English, you learn how to talk English along with your African native language. You just learn them both at the same time. So you speak English, like, but then also from that you get the English, you get British, you understand the Africans and the Indians, where they all had the presence of the British Empire in their countries. They know what to expect from Britain, but they're not all. Because I had a teacher on that same course as well with the safeguarding thing. I had a teacher who, um, he's African, and he said he was like, "This is the best country in the world." Like, and it was kind of shocking to hear because people don't say that about England because of the evil history that we have. But this African was like, "This is the best country in the world," and he's like, "Because no matter what crime you commit, everyone gets treated kind of as fairly, like you get a fair trial." Um, he's like, when he came here, which he was older, obviously, he's teaching security. But yeah, he's like, when he come here, he didn't know it. He didn't know it was wrong to cut someone's hands off for stealing. It's like, 'cause that's how he did it in their country. If you caught someone stealing, there was no court proceedings, there was no trial. They just cut your hand off. And he said, until I come to Britain, I didn't realise that was wrong. He's like, but it was, and I remember thinking, wow, like it took an immigrant to this country to tell a native English person, me, that the country was actually good. But anyway, we've waffled on about, we've gone completely off cue, but yeah, yeah. I say that actually Andrew Tate probably come out looking the better there, because yeah, I think he's right, but I think he's not only right that Muslims need to call out abuse in their society, because to be honest, in this society where everyone's so tiptoeing around racial things, it can only be called out by the own race of who it is. So it can only be Muslims that come out and call it out, because anyone else would get called racist for doing it. And but the same goes for British people. We need to start holding accountable our own, like I say, the BBC. Let's not get into the BBC. The BBC is the most evil thing that's ever existed on this planet. I'm telling you now. But yeah, child abuse is rampant in our government. It's rampant. But not just in that. Like I say, if you watch the pedo stings, it goes through all races, all age groups. It's not just an old man thing. Like, you can see someone in like their 20s going to meet a 10-year-old. Do you know what I mean? I think crazy. But yeah, anyway, that's the reaction. Sweet.